To be or not to bop? That is the question.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of To Be or Not to Bop. Now, today we're going to go over one of the sort of forgotten pioneers of bebop trumpet playing. And I'm talking about none other than the great Howard McGhee. Now, Howard McGhee is one of these figures in the music where I always talk about that trumpet lineage tree. And I'll break it down for you. We got Louis Armstrong, although there are many after Louis Armstrong. Then we have Roy Eldridge, and then from Roy Eldridge, we have Dizzy Gillespie. Now, Howard McGhee lives in this area between Roy Eldridge and Dizzy Gillespie. When I think about the great stylists of bebop music, I think about Howard McGhee, because you're hearing a little bit of Roy Eldridge's influence and Dizzy Gillespie's influence. In fact, when I first heard Howard McGhee, I thought it was Dizzy Gillespie, but he's just like right in the middle there. So he's in that era of swing era trumpet players, where the style and how you play is of such great importance. The notes are important, there's no doubt about that. These musicians are playing some serious harmony and melody, but the style and how you play is such a major emphasis in this particular style of swing era trumpet playing, post Roy Eldridge, before Dizzy Gillespie. So Howard McGhee was really one of the top stylists in this way. So with Howard McGhee, we have another great bebop instrumentalist who spent a large period of time in Detroit, Michigan. But he's actually from Tulsa, Oklahoma. When I go back to thinking about his style again, another thing you have with these swing era trumpet players, incredible facility on the instrument, high register, low register. In fact, we talked a little bit about Howard McGhee briefly in our Fats Navarro episode. Check out that episode if you haven't seen it. Him and Fats Navarro were really tight. They came up playing together in Andy Kirk's band and in this really pivotal period in the formation of bebop music. So Howard McGhee is also associated with West Coast jazz. He had a stint where he was very prominent in that West Coast scene. In fact, his recordings with Charlie Parker were made in the West Coast. The Dial Sessions with Charlie Parker. There's a really great picture where we see a young Miles Davis looking up at Howard McGhee in awe. Obviously, from trumpet player to trumpet player, I'm sure he's just marveling at the tone, the huge, beautiful sound he had, and all of the great attributes of his playing. But Howard McGhee was also just super cool, too. He had such a vibe to him. And, a lot of people associate Miles Davis wearing sunglasses while playing, and he's really got that signature sort of style. But I really think he got that style from Howard McGhee. He was definitely a huge influence on him. And he was an influence to all the young trumpet players of that era. Like I said, he came up with Fats Navarro. He influenced Kenny Dorham, Miles, of course. So with all of that influence, he's such a pivotal person in the history of bebop music, and in particular, bebop trumpet playing. So like I always do, I like to give you clips and have you have a chance to see what these musicians look like, what their vibe was like, to hear their voices, and to just get a general look inside of who they were. We know them a lot from records, but it's good to see them too. And fortunately for us all, Howard McGhee lived a relatively long life. He lived into the late 80s. So there's plenty of video footage for him, and there's some great interviews as well. So let's start with some video footage. Let's see a video of Howard McGhee playing. Yeah, so we have Howard McGhee, there he is, with Richard Davis and Roy Haynes on drums and Ted Dunbar on guitar.
Play something that a tune that Charlie loved very much. And by chance, we happened to hear the tune for the first time in Los Angeles, California. It's a Lady Day singing it. I hope you'll enjoy Lover Man.
Cool as can be. He's got his handkerchief, just like the great Louis Armstrong. So you hear that style there. That's something you hear from the early swing era trumpet players. Like I said, they have a lot of facility, a lot of power, a lot of high range. But something I notice a lot from trumpet players of that era, they embrace playing the instrument very softly and with a nice breathy, not too breathy, but quiet tone. So there's a contrast in dynamics. They're not always playing loud. Sometimes they play really soft so that when they do step on the gas, it really illuminates. And we hear in his style those same Gillespie-isms, so to speak. The way he plays a triplet. That real, that very gentle thing. You know, a lot of trumpet players of this era played the Martin Committee. And this is one of the reasons why I like the Martin Committee trumpet, because it has that thing. I can't really explain it. I think if you're playing bebop, it's a really cool horn to have. So let's hear a little bit more of Mr. McGee. So that's a little clip there of the incredible Howard McGhee. All right, now let's hear Howard McGhee speak a little bit about his early influences.
Was Roy Eldridge one of your influences?
Yeah, Roy was one of my first influences. I used to listen to him because I was in Detroit, and he was in Chicago playing at the Three Deuces, and I used to listen to him quite a bit.
Great Whiteway, 53rd Street and Broadway.
He was really playing too. I mean, I really have to give him credit because he was really and let me be loose.
Coleman Hawkins brought you to Los Angeles, I think around 1944.
So as we heard, Howard McGhee is influenced by many of the greats of the swing era. So not only trumpet players, but also by a saxophonist by the name of Coleman Hawkins. And actually, Howard McGhee started off on the saxophone. So his time with Coleman Hawkins had a big, major impact on him. Let's hear him speak a little bit more about that.
Coleman Hawkins brought you to Los Angeles, I think around 1944.
Yeah, that's right. That was in 1944. But I really joined the band in New York. Yeah. We used to have a ball, man, because Coleman was such a pleasure to play with, man. He just let you do what you want to do or play like you want to play, and he was like another freedom movement, you know.
I love that he called Coleman Hawkins and playing in his band a freedom movement.
Because he could play anything he wanted to play, and that just made me think about how many different ways I could play to go along with Hawk. And Hawk had Oscar Pettiford and Denzel Best and Sir Charles. Well, Hawk was a bad cat boy. He was a genius, man. Because I mean, he just there was no way you could get around him. He just played naturally, man. And it was such a kick to work with him. I just loved him because, man, he played so that I can't say that there was anybody else out here at that time playing any more than he was, except Bird. I mean, and Bird hadn't come along yet. When we got together with the band, we went to the studio here and made a record date, and all of them are classics, really, you know.
So here's some incredible footage of Howard McGhee and Coleman Hawkins together. Now, for all my Clifford Brown fans, you may know that song as Sweet Clifford, but that is before the recording of Sweet Clifford. So that's an old bebop contrafact on Sweet Georgia Brown that's been around before Sweet Clifford. So it's cool to hear musicians of this era playing that as well. So let's continue. Oscar Pettiford on the bass. So if we go back here, let's see some of that again. More of that footage of Howard. So you see him rocking the shades, looking sharp. I'm going to talk a little bit about his style here. So in typical bebop fashion, we hear those triplets, we hear those accents. And I always say this, it's important to note that bebop is a continuation of swing, of the style of the swing era. And when we listen to Howard McGhee, we hear that swing era feel that we know came from his predecessors, like Roy Eldridge, Dizzy Gillespie, Fats Navarro, Miles Davis, Kenny Dorham. They would go on to refine, not necessarily melodically, but harmonically, the things that were built way back in Pops's day to Eldridge to Dizzy. What's important about the stylistic traits of how a Howard McGhee plays, it's always super swinging. There's always that intensity, the accents are there, the triplets are there. So these things are just as important as your harmonic content. It's just how you play. Not necessarily what you're playing, but how you play it too. And Howard McGhee really exemplifies this thing. So let's hear a little more of that again. So great that there's all this footage of that. You can find all of this on YouTube. That's awesome. All right. All right, here's another clip of Howard McGhee playing Little Suede Shoes in tribute to the great Charlie Parker. Now you got a really heavy lineup here. The masters of bebop. None other than Sonny Stitt on the alto, Howard McGhee, J.J. Johnson, Tommy Potter, Walter Bishop, and Kenny Clark. So as we're seeing here, Howard McGhee was a major voice of the trumpet. He's not just an afterthought or just a guy in between Roy Eldridge and Dizzy Gillespie, but in the 40s, he was one of the top trumpet players. He won the downbeat pole in 1949. During the 50s, things slowed down for him a little bit, but he would make a comeback in the later 50s or earlier into the 60s. And he played with everybody. Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Fats Navarro, Coleman Hawkins, Billy Eckstein, Count Basie, Andy Kirk, Oscar Pettiford, Dexter Gordon, you name it, Wardell Gray, Milt Jackson. He played with everyone. So the legendary Howard McGhee had a beautiful philosophy about the music. He always felt that it should feel free and natural. These are things he talked about in his period working with Coleman Hawkins. Those were some of the things he learned. And he was a real advocate for the validity of what bebop music was. He said this was a music that was emotional and social, not just technical. And he learned all of this from hanging out with these great musicians, the era before him, and he loved playing with his mentors and the musicians who came after him. And he hung out with these musicians and taught and learned a lot. And like most musicians from this particular era, it was very important to have your own sound and honesty and individuality in your sound. These are things that were very important to him. And there are so many great recordings of Howard McGhee that are very important to check out. There's a record called Trumpet at Tempo, Dusty Blue, Maggie's Back in Town is another great one. Together Again with Teddy Edwards, Relaxing at Camarillo. Another one of my favorites, probably my favorite of Howard McGee's later recordings, is a record called The Return of Howard McGhee, because it has my favorite drummer on it, Philly Joe Jones. Y'all already know. So make sure you go and check all of these recordings out. They're all very important. All right, so we've learned so much about the great Howard McGhee. So the logical thing to do next is to check out the music. So if you want to hear a little bit more of Howard McGhee and hear me discuss his style and play you some of my favorite recordings, check out part 2 of this video. Thank you so much for checking out part 1 of Howard McGhee. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you in part 2.
To be or not to bop? That is the question.